Power creep. A lot of dictionaries define power creep as a process or balancing choice that introduces new features or content that by nature or design make old content obsolete. Now, since the gaming space itself is very broad, how power creep works is also very broad, and therefore not exactly simple or the same across video games. But they generally follow this rule of how power creep affects the game. In the gacha space in particular, it is very inevitable and unavoidable. But before we dip into the power creep in the gacha space, let's take a look at how it affects other games of other genres. Let's take Rainbow Six Siege for example, an FPS whose main feature is destructible environments, and the main identity of their operators are not their guns, but their gadget. Sledge is a very straightforward operator. He has a breaching hammer that destroys unreinforced surfaces. See that wooden floor? Break it. Now you can see below you. See that unreinforced wall? Punch a hole through it, and now you can use it to rotate from one room to another. One downside for Sledge is that he physically must be close to what he wants to smash, meaning if that enemies can hear him or see him breaking these surfaces, they can contest him at range with their guns or gadgets. Enter one of the latest attackers of Rainbow Six Siege, Ram. She has an armored car that violently moves along a straight path and destroys soft surfaces and even gadgets. Now since the gadget itself travels, while you have less control over what surfaces to destroy than Sledge, she is a lot tougher to contest, giving you more reasons to pick her over Sledge. Another example in a genre where power creep is very prevalent, especially in its DLC characters, is Tekken 8, a fighting game. In Season 1, just about every character in their DLC has an install, which is a fighting game mechanic which is essentially a buff that enhances a character's moves, giving them different properties, frame data, and sometimes even new combo starters or routes. Five himself, while not exactly having an install, he has a resource meter which can be compared to 2D fighters that have a super meter. While some characters like Asuka, who is part of the base roster, has an install that enhances her moves, these installs are very few in the base roster. It is reasonable to expect every DLC character to have something that the base roster by design does not have, which can be an install, a resource meter, stances, or even all three. Gacha games for the most part are free to play, meaning you do not need to spend money to play the game. Now, how these games make money for the budget, like maintaining its service, new content, new characters, it comes with the gacha mechanic, rolling for characters, weapons, etc. By design, characters that you roll for, or even spend for, will have and should have some intrinsic value tied to them that you would want to spend money for them. And usually, this comes in the form of power. Let's compare agents with the same element and role in Zenless Zone Zero, Grace and Yanagi. Grace is an electric anomaly character who builds up battery charges and spends these charges using her special attack to deal electric damage. Now, building these charges take 3 basic attacks and the final basic attack, which can take time, but this pretty much is her kit. It's very straightforward. Build meter, essentially use 3 basic attacks, spend it, use your final basic attack, spend it, rinse, repeat. Yanagi is also an electric anomaly character, but she has 2 stances. One stance increases electric damage and the other increases defense penetration. By using her special attack during basic attack 3, 4, or 5, she can cancel into the other stance, and she will keep the benefits of her previous stance for 8 seconds, while enjoying the benefits of her current stance. While Grace has to dodge attacks normally as she is trying to build meter, Yanagi is in a parry or block stance while she is using her special attack. She attacks very swiftly, so most of the time, you will be able to attack recklessly and relentlessly, which means there are less gaps in your offense where you deal no damage. Whereas Grace has to dodge every once in a while. Now this is just one example. This is one example of power creep, and I think the problem of power creep arises is when content is balanced around the power creep itself. There is a saying in the gacha space that if there is one thing that gacha players absolutely do not like, it is when the game produces a problem and sells a solution. The problem being the game's content or gameplay, usually endgame content, and the solution being a character that you may or may not have, but now you need. To some extent, Zenless Zone Zero and Wuthering Waves avoids bad power creep since players can still make base characters very much viable without needing duplicates of their characters or their signature weapon. The keyword for power creep, as I mentioned earlier, is obsolete. If there comes a time where a standard banner character like Grace is not even viable for endgame content without having to max out her cinemascape, or even with maxed out cinemascape, she just cannot clear endgame content, then that is when Zenless Zone Zero definitely has a bad power creep problem. Miyabi is already being eyed as a sign of the power creep issue, but for now, base characters and even 1.1, 1.2 characters remain very viable. Power creep can even affect a gameplay mechanic that seems free from power creep. Exploration. In Genshin Impact, exploration such as wall climbing or even moving from point A to point B has been pretty much fair and the same for all characters. Regardless if you are the main character, Jean, Hu Tao, or Xiangling, how you explore is pretty much the same until now. There are characters now that can explore or travel much more effectively, be it wall running, flying, or even riding a bike. The problem is that these characters are usually limited characters, meaning you must roll or wail for them. And this is a problem in a game that tacitly markets exploration. If you look up Genshin Impact, a lot of the words you'll see is explore, venture. So yes, even power creep can happen to a core gameplay mechanic that is not combat. Now, if you do not have these characters, you must wait for a rerun of the character, which can take a long time, if it even does. Now, these key features are practically quality of life features, and they are essentially being pay-gated. Wuthering Waves is showing some cracks in the department as well. Since 2.0, players can freely fly around in the 2.0 area, Rinasita. This is not available, however, in pre-2.0 areas, be it Huanglong, Mount Firmament, or Black Shores. Now, Phoebe breaks this rule, however, with her unique ability to fly on her staff. Now, granted, it does cost a lot of stamina, and it's really only useful in areas you cannot fly in, which is any area before Rinasita. So it's not that bad, but it is still a crack. In areas before, however, like I said, if you want to traverse much faster, you cannot just fly like you do in Rinasita. You must use Phoebe. At least until Kuro hopefully integrates flying in pre-2.0 areas as well. Now in Wuthering Waves, Phoebe right now, alongside Rover, who everyone has Rover, are the two characters that can apply Spectro Frazzle, which is a debuff or negative status, as Kuro has called it. Before the power creep allegations can creep in, however, Kuro already announced that this negative status mechanic will be applied to all elements. It's not just Spectro. This means that pre-Phoebe characters can benefit from this new mechanic. Now the question, of course, is whether or not they can apply it themselves. That is a completely different story. Fingers crossed that somehow they can. But honestly, only time can tell, and hopefully Wuthering Waves does not fall into the gacha trap of producing a problem and selling solutions. Zenless Zone Zero is also showing cracks with bad power creep with Evelyn's newest Wenjin, being able to shred fire resistance of enemies. Where characters like Ellen, who is an ice attack DPS, different element but same role as Evelyn, she has to rely on another character like Lycon to shred ice resistance of enemies. And elemental resistance shred is very common on stunners, sometimes support and defense characters. Now this means if a player wants to, or God forbid, needs to shred elemental resistance, any fire attack agent can do so with Evelyn's Wenjin, meaning that this limited banner Wenjin is now a must-have. So other two characters in the party no longer need to revolve around this shredding elemental resistance mechanic. However, Ellen still has to. Ellen must rely on Lycon to do so, whether you want to or need to. Now, in my opinion, the power creep that I feel is acceptable is a power creep that elevates the ceiling and the floor of power at the same time. Like I mentioned in Wuwa, there will come a time, and hopefully soon, when Phoebe and Rover are not the only one who can do elemental debuffs, which means the power ceiling, this is defined by Phoebe, onwards has raised because they will probably have negative status baked into their kit. While the floor has also been raised because characters before Phoebe will have some way to either apply or enjoy the benefits of negative status. Now, of course, to balance this, enemies do not need to have Spectrofrazzle applied for them to be realistically killable yet. Instead, they can do these negative status effects to you as well. So there is that sort of balance where they are giving players a new toy to play with, but enemies can also use the same toy against them. But the enemies are not buffed in a way that you must use Spectrofrazzle or negative status to effectively beat them. Because if that were the case, literally any character, any lineup that does not have Phoebe or Rover, and by extension is not Spectro, is effectively obsolete. Thankfully, that is not the case. Yet. For now. Now, of course, this is a Wuthering Waves specific example, so it is not exactly applicable to other gacha games, but the concept and idea is there. Raise the ceiling, but also raise the floor. Now, ultimately, bad power creep truly does happen when, despite players' skill or the attempt to grow their skill or ability and get better to play the game, they just cannot get over a hurdle or wall in the game that is easily solvable by forking over some money. Now, to take a quote from a really good take from Tectone, the everyman needs to be able to clear this game. So, solo dungeon mains and people who clear MOC in 0 to 1 cycles are not the players that these games should focus on as a priority. It's the everyday player.
The everyman needs to be able to clear this game. Mr. Pokey going live, clearing things does not matter. Okay? It doesn't. It doesn't matter. Dreamy clearing shit does not matter. That Zalzu Tethos person doesn't matter. You know when it matters? When the everyman can clear it. That is me. That is what I attempt to be in every single one of these games. I am not a sweat. I am not a tryhard. I am the target demographic. The people who play just a little bit because they enjoy the game and then they quit, because those are the people who are going to be making up 99% of your audience. These people who zero cycle and Honkai Star Rail, these people who do hitless runs, Danjin solo runs, and Wuthering Waves, they don't matter because those are not the people who are playing in mass.
Right? I have highlights of my clears of tactical holograms in Wuthering Waves, and they are not using meta characters with God Roll Echoes, with dupes. I have none of those. I do not have Carlotta, Shorekeeper, Zhezher, Camellia, Changli. I did not have any of those characters. I still don't, save for Changli. I was still able to clear these tactical holograms. Now, granted, the latest character I did have was Phoebe, and Phoebe is insanely strong. Yes, I will concede that. But I still had to work hard. I did not have god rolls. The most limited meta characters I have right now, in my opinion, is Phoebe and Jinshi, both of whom I have with no dupes, and only Phoebe has her signature weapon. I still had to sweat and lock in to clear difficulty 6 for these tactical holograms. And I think, by Tectone's definition, I am not the average player. And honestly, I think I am nerfing myself by not optimally building these characters, because that's not exactly too fun for me. Like the get in, get out of spending energy for materials I need to build these characters, that's practically bare minimum for me. And I am still working on building these characters, but it's not like I am spending most of my time getting god roll echoes and really looking at an Excel sheet of what skills I should max out and not max out for these characters. No, I'm doing it my way, so to speak. It's not optimal, but it's fun. I think that is something that most players kind of do anyway. They always go with what's fun, not optimal. And for them, fun is optimal. So, min-maxing in gacha for me is not exactly easy to have fun doing. But of course, Whimpering Wastes, TOA, it kind of does require some level of min-maxing, or you just have to get really good at the game. Now, I may or may not be the average Wuwa player, but I know for a fact that some of these fights are not difficult because they are unfair or have unfair mechanics. They're not difficult, they're straight up just unfair, or they have unfair mechanics. And that is where power creep starts to creep in, is when something that is difficult versus something that is unfair. Now, this can induce that feeling, like I said, of power creep, where you feel you need to roll the newest character to clear it. I do not like that. I want people to roll for a character because they like the character or because they have fun with their kit, not because they need to have this character to clear the toughest content in the game. Clearing the toughest content in the game while you have the newest character should be because you actually know how to use said character, not because you have said character. Those are two completely different things. I may be dog shit at the game for all I know. I may be greedy and stupid too, but I feel that the average player should be able to clear this, meaning tactical holograms and TOA, while feeling reasonably challenged with a standard, not meta lineup, no god roll echoes, and not feeling like the fight is unfair. So the fights should feel like a challenge, but not unfair. Not unfair. Now, power creep is a very delicate and difficult issue in gacha games in particular, in my opinion. And I think what needs to be done is for players to give constructive and proper feedback, and for the team to listen to all the right people. Of course, solo dungeon mains, people who can 0-1 cycle MLC have things to say. But those are not the only people they should listen to. They should also listen. The team should also listen to, as what Tectone said, the average player who are trying to clear content and play the game. They don't have god roll echoes. They don't have dupes. They'll be lucky if they have the signature weapon of their favorite characters. And like I said, there is a very big difference of difficulty and unfair. Because before people start doubting skill issue, ask yourself first, is the fight actually difficult / challenging, or is it straight up unfair? Because if it is unfair, that's not a skill issue. That's just bad design. Now, of course, it's easier said than done. But if both players and devs truly love the game, they will exert effort to make the game better for everyone.